to the Cyber Monday show. We have an absolute banger in store. First, we're going to welcome Maekshyft. Sir, how's it going?
Get my fingers in the view of the camera. I'm doing really good, man. It's been a minute.
It has, and it's only been 1 week, which is hilarious. It was like the longest week ever. Yeah.
Technically, it's been 2 though, because if you figure, we haven't done one since the Monday before that, so it's been technically 2 weeks.
That is true, actually. I can't even math. I am. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't even spell math.
Fair. If you're watching, I just put a link in the chat. The StudioSec Clips channel is now officially the Cyber Monday show channel. And so if you want to watch these podcasts on replay, definitely hit the subscribe button. The link for the channel is down there in the description. If you came from Twitter, you should already be watching this live stream from that channel. So easy shortcut. And if you like the logo, that is a Maekshyft inspiration. So shout out Maekshyft.
Hi.
It looks clean. Well,
I do really like it.
It's exciting.
I'm very excited.
It looks very good. The honeycomb was a good call. Well, with that, we ladies and gentlemen, we have an awesome guest here with us today. He's been in the industry for a minute, and we have already been talking about some pretty interesting topics here. So we're very excited to get after it. Ladies and gentlemen, James Murray. Sir, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you all?
Good.
Hanging in there.
Looking forward to a great conversation. I like your podcast.
Yeah, we're
Yeah. Well, if you start asking me ones and zeros questions about routers and cybersecurity, I might be in trouble.
Can you teach us subnetting? We don't know.
You don't? Oh, well, I have taught that in class, but I usually get paid to do that.
So. Hey, we wouldn't want to cheat out of that.
What's your Venmo?
and the modern, they've changed it now. It's not 4 octets; it's much bigger, and I haven't really gone into it at that level anymore.
Yeah, I mean, who even
that goes in
IPv6
and everything?
Yeah. Anyway, IPv6. We'll just bully IPv6. It's IPv4 for life.
Well, I'm sure that's going to be the case for another 10 years.
Right. I love it. Well, for folks that haven't been able to get to know you quite yet, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and your your time in the industry real quick?
Sure. I am. I'm one of those guys that kind of self-taught themselves. As the industry started to develop, people hired me for some reason because I wasn't afraid to turn on the computer, and I started becoming a system administrator. So about 31 years ago, I started working while I went back to college after I'd broken my back, and I came back to college and started studying biomedical technology, and got a job working for the community college offices in Spokane, and worked my way up from there. Worked for the Spokane Chamber of Commerce, and then I got working at Wenatchee Valley College, and then I got dragged into working for the city of Seattle. And after the city of Seattle, I started working at every time I'm moving up, I'm getting higher and higher. So now, just as 2000 started, I got hired by Avanade as one of the early employees. And then when the 2000 bust, I was one of the first people to fire from Avanade. So ever since then, I've been working for clients on contract for clients like Microsoft and AT&T, T-Mobile, Smith Barney, Washington Mutual before they went under, and done a lot of work for different government agencies like the Washington State Patrol, and just lots all over the place. I really like variety a lot, and so I should get a full-time job. My wife would love it if I got a full-time job, because then they wouldn't have to see me in the daytime. But it seems to work out that I find really good opportunities. It's like you look for interesting work, and I get contacted probably 20 times a week for projects, and I am like, oh, that's not very interesting. Oh, that sounds interesting. So tell me, what would you pay? And so we start negotiating. So it's not that I'm always working, but at Microsoft, they have this piece where you have to walk away from a contract for, now it's 6 months. So what do you do during that 3 to 6 months that you're away? Well, my friends would find out and they'd say, hey, I hear you're off. Can you do a project for me? And so I would do a 1099 project for somebody, and then another person, and another person. And I've eventually gotten to the point where I've worked for over 100 local companies on their networks. So I'm familiar with small, medium, large, and enterprise level companies.
Wow, that's awesome. That's awesome. And
Yeah.
that's, I mean, you've been able to get a pretty comprehensive picture, I feel, being able to kind of see all that,
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And then, you guys were talking about how do you learn stuff in one of your other podcasts, and you were talking about certifications and all those type of things. Well, instead of I've gotten probably 8, 9 certifications, but an easier way to learn is to put yourself out and start teaching classes at the community college. Either set up your own weekend classes or go and teach a class for them. And I can tell you that you'll learn a ton when you know that somebody's going to ask you a question. And at first you're thinking, what's an Ethernet cable? What does that do? And then they ask you directly, and you have to start talking about how the crossover works, all the different pieces of the, or somebody says, so you go to a test teach where the teachers want to see if you know anything, and they say, can you teach us about subnetting? And I'm like, okay, I guess so. But when I did, my most interesting one was when I did a test teach on Mom Server, which is now SCOM for Microsoft. And I taught Mom, and nobody had ever seen Mom before. So I thought that would be good because they couldn't challenge me on questions.
I love it. And I love the point that you made, that the best way to learn is to teach. My dad, would always mention, whenever one teaches, to learn. It's
Yes.
stuck with me, especially with like YouTube, making some of these videos and some of like the cybersecurity 101 videos. Like I'm learning more making those videos than I feel like I did in the actual college class. I'm also paranoid too, because I'm like, oh, I hope I don't teach this wrong. That's going to be bad.
That's the way the teaching at the college level for 2 years. I was like, when is somebody going to stump me? And then after 2 years, I realized these guys don't know as much as I do. And I've been challenged several times, but I've never had a problem. And most people will say, you just say, oh, I don't know, I'll have to look that up for you. And they're cool. Everybody's cool with that. Yeah. And then you tell them a real world story and they go, their mouths drop and they go, I want to be just like you. Not everybody, but it's a lot of fun teaching. It's a great way to go.
I love it. A quick question that just kind of pops to mind, kind of thinking about, and my brain just kind of ping pongs around, right? And so we'll probably come back to teaching here in a minute, but real quick, just while I have the question before I lose it. You said you've worked with, over 100 companies, right? And at all kinds of tiers, right? Small, medium, large size companies. What are some consistent trends that you see among all of those levels from a security perspective? Let's say like one thing that you see consistently done wrong and one thing that you see consistently done right, that we can all take away.
I think that I see problems evolve as CEOs become more sophisticated and employees become sophisticated. In the early days, like 30 years ago, there were I call them the old dinosaurs. And those were the guys in the last 5 to 10 years of their career. They didn't want to learn technology. It was DOS and Windows 3.1. Nobody wants to learn anything, but they had a lot of wisdom to bring. So they were the ones that would have their secretaries print their email, write the answers on the paper, and have their secretaries write things back. So they didn't care. The next step that came along is the businesses that were more successful. So you had larger businesses. Mm-hmm. And they figured we're too small for anybody to notice us. We'll just not say anything, and we'll stay under the light. And they would share passwords, like admin passwords, with everybody in the company. So everybody had access to the servers. And then as we move up the ladder, everybody said, oh, we'll stay under the radar. We're too small, even as they're becoming like 10, 20, 30, $100 million businesses. And so when they got to be around 80, $100 million businesses, they say, well, maybe we'll just focus on turning on password enforcement in Active Directory or in whatever directory services system that they're using. And nowadays, though, you're getting to like the multi-factor authentication. It's the first time I've relaxed as system administrator is as we start using fingerprints and multi-factor authentication. And it was like, oh, thank goodness, because there's so many hacks where somebody hid their password under their keyboard, and then somebody walking through just lifts up all the keyboards and finds the right guy. The other thing I've seen too that's changed, when I was starting out, 70% of the hacks came from internally inside of the network. So I would go in as a new system administrator. I walk in, and within 3 days, I would get these little knocks on my door, and people would say, nobody knows this yet, and I don't want you to tell anybody, but XYZ is available, and everybody can see everybody's payroll, kind of thing. So the front desk person, any number of people had access to the security. When I went, and I'm trying to remember not to say names, there was several very large organizations that did not really understand how security groups or security worked. And they just gave the wrong people the wrong stuff. And the system administrator said, yeah, everything's fine. We're doing great. And the CEO didn't know what to do, so they trusted him. And then as we've gotten into more and more ITIL information, companies that are watching ITIL, and I see that more at the international, multi-billion-dollar kind of companies, is they're starting to really follow ITIL best practices. Mm-hmm. So I could share examples that's not true, but when they start following the business processes, that's a way better way. Where now they're putting their security on the correct way. Now we see the last 15 years, 10 years, a lot of external hacks that are just not getting hit. And everybody thinks they're secure. But say, for example, you go into a clinic and they're just being hacked left and right. It's like they don't even, I don't want to stereotype, but there is no security on most medical clinics and hospitals, and they've gotten hit with HIPAA violations. So they're starting to try and learn how to do that. But it's fortunately the multi-factor authentication and that type of thing is getting higher and higher. Now we're getting the single sign-on. We're learning how to log on to 20 different systems in one way that is secure. I don't know if that's answering your question.
No, that's great. Do you find that the end user, and I guess for this we'll just say like the employee, right? The general everyday employee, do you find that they're getting to be more sophisticated with security as time goes on, and the security awareness practices continue to iterate? Or are we still kind of dealing with a lot of the same general problems that we've always dealt with?
People are people, and I notice, especially among the younger users, they really have no idea what's underneath the iceberg, and so they think that this is their neighborhood. So they walk on and they just do stuff that's just you and I would have our hair turn gray. Just watching what they're doing. They're assuming that nobody's going to look at them or have anything going wrong. So it's like, and I don't want to, but the younger generations, it's just like a neighborhood thing. So and it isn't until they get hurt that all of a sudden it dawns on them, and then they start taking care of themselves. And hopefully it isn't a bad hurt the first time. But as you know, everybody's vulnerable. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And
Well, and
so go ahead.
No, go ahead. I cut you off. That's on me.
No, I'm happy to jaw with you. I don't want to dominate the conversation.
No, you're the one that we're interviewing. So yeah, go ahead.
No problem. So one of the oddest things I've ever seen over and over, and that's consistent, goes back to this idea. We trust our employees. We're not going to tie it down too much. We trust our employees. And so it's a little tiny, small family. They've got maybe 50 employees. They've been around forever. They're doing really well. They're growing, they're doing things. And then they start hiring new people who aren't quite as trustworthy as the other people. And then all of a sudden, everybody has access to the system administrator password. The other thing that happens when, what managed services or an external IT support company, break fix, you're hiring somebody to come in. Most businesses, and this is really frustrating to me, most businesses do not have any checks and balances on these types of people and for their internal IT people. And so I took over a network for a company one time. It was a fight to get that company. They'd been hacked. They were losing all kinds of things. They weren't able to do their stuff. And when we finally took over the network, they had to admit to us, we forgot the admin password for Active Directory. And they couldn't give us the admin password for Active. So we had to hack. And you don't want to hack Active Directory if you can help it. And that was in the earlier day that I couldn't even come close to trying to do that now. But they forgot the password. So we had to run the system on admin equivalents because we didn't know what the admin passwords were. And you'd think this only happened once, but it happens over and over again. And it's like there's no process, there's no checks and balances in the IT infrastructure. That's why I really like ITIL, is because they put in a good business process around the whole IT sophistication. I hope this is helping or answering questions.
No, yeah, that's great. That's great. Make you were about to say something as well there.
No, I was gonna say, like, I think it really, kind of stands for something when, even for somebody like yourself who's been in this business and been doing this kind of stuff for so long, still running across the same stuff that, even the younger generation working in IT and everything is still running across, like the passwords on sticky notes underneath the keyboards and everything, like but it's like, it kind of,
well, I may be the dinosaur.
Well, no, but I mean, it kind of goes back to that user training, like explaining and expressing to these end users, whether you're of an older generation or a younger, because like my last gig, I worked with both. Like it was a kind of like a family-owned company, but we had roughly right around 400, so employees, and it was a mix of, an older generation and a younger generation. And working in help desk, I noticed that both sets of people, groups of people and everything were doing the exact same thing. They were writing down passwords on sticky notes, placing it under. And it's like, so it just, I think it just literally goes back to that user training that I think a lot of companies, kind of neglect on, and even like you were saying, that I think it was very, very important. And I don't think a lot of us, at least myself, didn't even think about is that, when you have these MSPs, these managed service providers, everything, not having some sort of checks and balances on them and what they, are doing and everything. I think that's a really, really important note to hit on.
I think that the companies, the providers of these services have done a really good job of locking down systems and bulletproofing them against users. But it's really difficult to bulletproof them against the system administrators themselves. They think they're the smartest people in the world. I was reading some book, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert like you guys, but you have to read a little bit. And there is a list of the top 10 passwords that system administrators use, and everywhere I go, I find that list works. And I think that system administrators get so cocky, they think, oh, there's no way I can be hacked. I'm too smart for that. And they have problems or forget their admin passwords. That's the stupidest thing.
It makes me think of like doctors like being the worst patients.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Like right there, like we always say, and it almost kind of makes me think a little bit of like kind of your comment earlier about like younger people with just kind of assuming we got the technology down, and then like not actually understanding fundamentally how any of it works. Like I totally see it with like some friends that aren't in the field, like they're able to navigate their devices pretty effectively, but I mean, yeah, they have no idea how anything communicates or like any of the security stuff. And to be fair, like they don't like work in the industry, but also like but so then but yeah, I don't know, it can be hard. It can be hard. So having like those conversations on like describing the basics of how things work, it's a bit of a challenge. It's like
and there's, I've been doing this a long time, and so when I began, I was helping people by kneeling down next to their desktops while they were working through things and letting them type on the computer. And then it was much easier to teach a little 5-minute class when you're kneeling down next to somebody. They're so nervous, they're going to, and you go, oh, don't worry about it. We've got a list of the people with the worst desks, so you're not even on the list. So it's much easier to build those relationships and convince people that us and we're talking and they're not. So then I would start doing something where, like, I worked at the Wenatchee Valley Community College for a couple of years, and it was really bad. But I started walking through the hallways twice a day, and I found you'd walk for 10 minutes and somebody'd, hey, James, can you take care of this for me? And then, oh yeah, no problem. And we'd do a little quick 5-minute and take care of things. This was before I believed in ticketing systems. And then I'd walk down the hallway some more. And then by the time, it might be an hour or two before I actually got around the whole place. And it took a year on that on most projects. It took a year to walk around the whole place without anybody saying, James, can you help me with something? And I think those little 5-minute classes that you can give that explain how to do stuff is really important. But we don't see that anymore. When everybody's calling up a phone person, and the phone person has to be off in a few minutes, or else it costs people more, and it's a problem. Another, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. What I was just gonna compliment on what you were saying was, because I had worked in help desk before I had gone into cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah, I remember. I watched that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I had even come across was, because I'm very much like like we were talking before the show had started. I said I'm a very extroverted person. Like I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy being around people. I am not, and even in help desk, I'd get kind of yelled at for it sometimes, because I was like, I do not want to sit behind the keyboard and be using, Teams or Jabber or whatever it is to talk to somebody and walk them through something. No. I'm going to your desk and I'm wanting to talk to you about this stuff. And I would use that opportunity to kind of, if somebody was having an issue with something, like it was showing them how to troubleshoot, if this is happening with your PC, like these are some certain steps that you can take in doing that, like, and just, but like you said, having those conversations. But I think something that a lot of people don't realize, or it's something that maybe we don't necessarily talk about, I guess, a whole lot, is that, like, it's fine and it's necessary to have those conversations as long as you are putting it in ways that the end user can understand. Because if you start getting too technical with those 5-minute conversations, you've essentially just wasted 5 minutes talking to them, because you're speaking up here and their understanding is down here.
Yeah, I called it technical glaze. When you start talking to somebody, and somebody would ask me a question, they were really excited. I'd ask them, and I'd start talking to them, and I was trying to think, how do I say this really simply? 15 minutes later, I'm still talking, and they suddenly wake up and go, "Oh my!" And you could see in their eyes, "Oh my gosh, I don't remember anything he said the last 10 minutes." And so it was like, you have to learn how to avoid those technical ways of explaining things, and just like you're saying. But I don't know how people do it. And I think you guys were mentioning training is really important.
Mhm.
How do you train people to do something? You can't. People don't. It takes longer than 5 minutes. Nobody's going to learn. It's even Einstein. When I started studying college and how to teach, Einstein couldn't listen in a lecture for more than 15 minutes before his mind wandered, and he had a super long. So people, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute, and then you're going to lose them. So you have to come up with simple ways to explain it, and it's targeted right to them. That's what I liked about desktop support.
Yeah,
I can see a smile on your face.
No, yeah, I think it's such a challenge because especially like with things like TikTok, where like like long form content, like say like YouTube, where you can, or a blog post, or, where it takes like 5, 10, 15 minutes to consume that information, right? And then by that point,
Right.
your mind's wandering. But then you have like TikTok, which is 15 seconds to 60 seconds. I'm kind of curious to see what, and it's most of that's like more entertainment. I've seen like with like YouTube Shorts or Reels or whatever. Like there's some like educational stuff, but obviously you're not going to be teaching complex stuff in that short of a time, right? Or at least it's going to be very, very difficult too. And so it's kind of, I'm curious to see how people learn and how people teach, and how really attention spans evolve with that kind of content medium being more in vogue. But also, is it possible to teach in that kind of medium, and is it possible to consume more dense content, more dense information, I guess I should say, in that kind of medium? It's
It is
that kind of edge, but yeah, it's interesting.
It is. So if you studied how to teach, you know that there's probably 3 learning styles. Some people are real visual learners. You can give them a book and they pick it up just like that. There are other people that are good audio learners, and then there are other people that are good hands-on learners. And if you can give them more things at the same time, it works out. I was always an audio learner when I was younger, but as I got older, now I've gotten so experienced at visual reading manuals and books. I also started doing, in this industry, if you want to keep growing, you have to start learning new things. So besides learning how to teach, I also started learning technical writing. So a lot of my work right now is technical writing. If you want to walk into a business owner and say, and you want to analyze their network, and then you see, oh, these are the obvious problems. Well, how do you express it? You can express it by language, but they don't understand what you're talking about. You can express it through writing, and there are very formal formats that people are used to reading, and they'll pick it up really quickly. And then there are imagery. And if you know how to draw images in Visio and different formats, put together a spreadsheet with the right graphs and everything together, it's amazing how I've had people pick up things in seconds. When I rewrote my spreadsheet with the columns in the opposite direction, all of a sudden they're going, oh, I get it. I see what you've been talking about. And there are ways to communicate, but it's not something that you learn overnight. Every skill, it takes you about 5 years to become good at doing something. It takes 2 years to become competent at something, but 5 years to become good at it, 10 years to become world class at it. So if you're at 3 years, you're going, I still have to sleep on this and figure this out as you're going along and practice. So it's good to practice on people. And I always watch for the technical glaze. When their eyes glaze over, I say, it's time for me to stop. And I was really proud when my technical glaze went from 45 minutes, where I was glazing people over 45 minutes, and it was down at 3 minutes, where once they had 3 minutes of glaze, I was done. So it's a lot of fun to practice a new experience, and that's teaching.
Well, and I was going to say too, I think that is where I think TikTok can have a very positive impact, because it's very short videos. And if and you do a little bit of research or whatever, and you can figure out how to take something that is, like subnetting, something that's maybe not quite as entertaining really to study and understand, and you can condense it and make it very, get down to the fundamentals of it, but also put it in a entertaining manner that you can then throw up on TikTok where it's only 30, 60 seconds. I think that's going to start reaching a lot more people, because I mean, even for myself, like I'm on TikTok, not making videos because I just know that'll never happen. But I like watching videos. And if something really kind of catches my eye and is entertaining, then I will sit there and I will watch it. But if it's something where whatever it is that this person's doing, if it just is not capturing my attention in that first couple seconds, which is horrible to say, then I swipe, because I'm just like, you did not do anything to try to captivate your audience.
Yeah.
And I think that is where, like I said, like if we're taking these concepts from cybersecurity or IT and we're doing something that is, and I don't even know the right way to go about doing it, but if you can figure out a way to make it entertaining right off the rip, you're going to start teaching more and more people about the concepts that could be very complex, and we're making them more easier to digest.
I understand what you're saying.
Rebuttal.
I'm trying to think about what to say to that, because for me, I get so bored watching people try to explain things unless they're really good at it.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to how multi-key factor authentication works, I spent probably 10 years trying to figure that one out. And I'm still not confident that I would have to take notes before I started teaching a class on it, because it just gets confusing sometimes. My brother, Cisco guy, he had it down quick, and he was trying to figure out how to do his own multi-factor authentication. He wanted to do it in the mail system before it was even email. And I was like, it's a matter of who you're talking to. Some teachers are really good teachers. Some people are relate really well. I find that when I teach well, it's because I've got people who want to understand something, and they see you and they come to respect you and think you're worthwhile. They will take the time to listen to you because they trust you. But when you go on a TikTok, I don't do TikTok that much, but if you go onto a YouTube video or a different teacher in a class, you could be bored to death, or you can have them say, well, that's a great question. Here's a situation where that and all of a sudden ears perk up and all this stuff. And then you explain how you solved the problem. And they go, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm reading one of your notes about one of the notes. Top tips that you would have for people to communicate your message effectively through writing. Oh, that's a great question. That is a great question
for people that are listening on the podcast.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I've done a lot of technical writing. And so when I started my first job, I was a work study in Spokane. And my mentor said, James, one thing that would be really good, if you learned how to write, you would be great, because everybody would hire you. And I said, great, how do you write? He said, I don't know. I'm a technical guy. I don't know how to write. So I was like, oh, great. How do I learn it? So I started learning how to draw out a subnet directory and all these different things. And I spent a lot of time at night thinking how, I get a question, a help desk question. I would get a question and think, how am I going to, I started making these mind maps of how things worked and with images and stuff. So then you go and you start putting things together in a way. And if you understand how people logic, and now go look at some of the old school technical writing courseware. And what you always know, it's just like in project management. You start at the beginning. What's the title? Is the title, you want your title relevant? Is there an abstract? You don't want to read a whole article to find out, this isn't even about anything I'm not interested. So just 2 or 3 lines that are interesting. And then the next step is, okay, so what type of it? Is this an informational document? Is this a step-by-step install document or a setup document? Is this, and so as you start to write that, if it's, you want to start talking about prerequisites. And I think the most important thing in technology, besides prerequisites, when you're teaching a principle in technology, you've got to start with the definitions. You got to explain the definitions. What does TCP/IP stand for? What does DNS stand for? And so when I was teaching my classes in college, I would come in about 15 minutes early, and I had a vocabulary list from the book that I was teaching, and I would write all the words and acronyms and everything that I was going to be teaching, that I'd been teaching for the previous 2 weeks. And we would start with a half an hour and say, what does this mean? And everybody would look at me like I was nuts. You're supposed to tell us. And so I would go through, and we'd go through, and then the next day I'd put up the same exact words, only a few more that we were learning from the chapter. And after a while, they would get it that they needed to put especially after the first test, when all those words were on the test, then they would actually start coming in before I came in, ready to write down all the words on the thing. So if you understand the vocabulary, now when you go into, if you imagine you're on a project, you're creating an online system for people. You've got developers, you've got testers, if you're lucky, and you've got system admins, and you've got all these different people that are working on this. Now they come in and talk to each other, and they each have their own vocabulary. So if you want something, you stop them and say, what is your definition? What do you mean by XYZ? And they say, well, I mean this. And the programmer goes, no, that doesn't mean that. It means this. And I'm like, oh, so yes means no. And they all go, yeah, that's right. So vocabulary is the most important thing in technology. I've saved months and months of time by having people go over the vocabulary. So when I do my technical writing, if I can convince people to let me do it, I'll put in a list of a vocabulary list. And if you're brand new, the vocabulary list isn't as important. But if you've been around for 10 years or 15 years, technology is the same thing. Each time it comes out, it's doing the exact same thing. There's just a different vocabulary for it. So if you learn what the vocabulary means in this new version of the top software, you already know all the principles. You just figure out, oh, this vocabulary means this. It's the same as this, and boom. And when you go talk to somebody, it works out. And you say, oh, is this like, and if you're talking to an older person, I just did this with one guy. So you mean like you're using software as a service for writing your router rules, for your storage rules, just like now these are software instead of SANs, like we had when we had the routers. It's now software developed as opposed to the hardcore iron that we had at Cisco. And he said, yes, that's exactly right. And I went, oh, got it. I didn't have to have him explain all the storage factors and stretch factors. I didn't have to go through all the HCI and all the different things. I just had to understand the vocabulary. And if you can get the vocabulary to somebody that has 5-10 years of experience, you don't need to do much more than that. Sorry, that's a long way to answer your question.
No, I thought that was great. And it's like, yeah, just like you said, people are humans. People are people, people, we have our own vocabulary. You got to meet them where they are.
And I did have a problem with tech when I first started out, and it was a team lead for the first time, we're doing Y2K stuff. And so we have tons of teams that are doing the exact same thing, upgrading the same computers, So if you don't write well and give a good process, and you want to come up with a consistent process, somebody's going to make a mistake on that process. 10 of them might get it, and the 11th one won't. It's fact. So you have to figure out what did you do wrong? You have to assume I did it wrong, not the reader. And that's the easiest way to figure out how to rewrite it better in a way that people can understand. But that's a different skill set than troubleshooting a workstation or troubleshooting a server or a router or a packet.
Would you say that everybody, to some degree, should be at least familiar with the, I guess the theory and the concepts behind technical writing, as in like putting the definitions first, understanding or establishing a mutual vocabulary and doing that, or is it, probably okay to just silo down to like, you have your folks doing troubleshooting over here, your security, your architects, technical writers, and they don't necessarily share roles or duties like that.
The cool thing about technical writing is it's boring. I know it's weird to be cool. You know where everything is every time you look at it. So no matter what technology it is, if it's written consistently the same way, and you usually don't need to know everything, but if you know that the vocabulary is in the vocabulary set, the prereqs are in the prereqs text, the install instructions in the main body, you can skim through it really fast and go through it. The problem is when you have to reread detailed steps and find the little pieces that you don't know and mine them out of the documentation. So as long as your writing is always consistent, and one of the things that drives me up the wall with programmers is, there's a happy path when you do the install, and then when you're troubleshooting, then it doesn't work, and all the troubleshooting things that you had to do to put it together. So you put, and if this doesn't work, then you put this, and if this doesn't work, you do this, and if this doesn't work, you do this. So now you've got a set of steps, and you have to read all this stuff that is contingent on if something goes wrong before you can actually figure out what they're talking. Oh, I don't need to worry about that. Oh, I don't need. So I try to write things in a happy path with just the most consistent things and all. And then I put an addendum in at the end, or a troubleshooting section, or a section that says, here's how you figure out if you happen to see this problem. And anybody that doesn't happen to see that problem ignores it. They can just skim past it. But the ones that really need it, they stop and they say, that happened, that log error came up in my thing, therefore, let me start writing about it. So
I like that.
This is totally different than cybersecurity. Sorry, but I'm a big believer in technical writing, and the more bland and boring technical writing is, the better. And if you write it consistently that way, then even if you're writing to an Indian audience or a Filipino audience or a Russian audience or a Chinese audience, they're looking for the same information in the exact same place. So they can use the same English documentation that you're writing for English speakers.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and I think it does absolutely play, a pretty big role in cybersecurity because, again, we're talking about patching and solving, the external threat, and even like internal threats, because that certainly isn't going away. We've seen with lapses taking advantage of internal vulnerabilities and insider threats and all that kind of stuff.
I was listening to you talk about that. Was incredible.
Crazy, right? Like that, like the I don't know.
That's
think,
what hacking is. That's what.
Yeah,
hacking
exactly.
Is.
We're always wanting to talk about like the super flashy like Conti or Sandworm or some of these like very professional hacker groups, and then you have like a bunch of kids like Lapsus show up, and they still sweep the floor.
Well, how did Lapsus get? That's how the professionals get started, is by being Lapsus.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
that's how the mafia got started, as street gangs.
Yeah, well, but think about like Conti, like they did technical writing. They have documentation for their own.
Yeah.
I keep wanting to say weaponry. their own tools and malware. I can see Make. He's primed.
I'm primed and ready to go. I just kind of, again, going back to that, like saying that a lot of the professionals start off like Lapsus, they're little kids. They're curious. That's when their brains are probably the most curious. So it's like, I mean, how often do you hear, I mean, heck, even when we interviewed Doggy G, I mean, when he was younger and he was learning hacking, that's when he was getting curious. He's like, oh, something happened to my computer. Well, why did that happen? And he starts, Googling, or he's jumping on the IRC channels, and he's talking to people and figuring things out. And he just so happened to get in with, the wrong group at the right time, and they taught him all these things. But it's like now he's using what he learned way back then, and he's built on it to, advance his career and be where he's at today. So I think, I think a lot of, and this kind of goes back into the educational part of things, you know, and going back into schools and everything is, I think something that we definitely need that we don't have now in like elementary, middle school, high school, and everything is like a legit either computer 101 class or a cybersecurity 101 class. I'm not saying you, I'm a car guy. I think they should have a cars 101 class and everybody should take it because there's so many people that don't know how to like change their oil or replace a tire. Yeah, spark plugs, like just what I would consider to be very simple things because I worked on cars before I jumped into computers. That's stuff that just a lot of people sit back. Like I've talked to some of my friends and they're like, I just take it to Valvoline. Like that's what I do. And I'm like, that's great, but you should probably know how to do it because Valvoline's not going to replace your flat tire if you're on the side of, 75. So, but yeah, I think we really, and Lapsus is a perfect example of this. It's like you have a bunch of very curious kids that
those are
just started getting a hold of technology, and technology is everywhere now. I mean, it's very, very easily accessible
to much easier users.
Yeah, and I think that if you have classes in elementary and everything, and even as far as high school that teach just basic cybersecurity concepts, it might even reduce how much some of these businesses and other companies are having to input into their security training because you're getting it at the school level, at the high school level, so that by the time they get to their businesses and everything, they already know certain things to look for phishing emails or whatever,
It's true. I would probably be bored to death if I was a kid studying cybersecurity. If you said, I'm going to show you how to hack into something, I would be much more interested in that.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though, is, okay, so if you take a boring cybersecurity concept, what's the difference between that and learning Algebra 2? It's a very boring concept, and you have to force this kid to understand math that he's never going to use outside, because he's going to go to be a paleontologist or something. Doesn't need to know math. He just needs to know dinosaur bones.
How is he going to calculate how many years ago it was when the bone was buried in the dirt?
Checkmate.
But he doesn't need to know the quadratic equation. Doesn't need to know long division or anything, So it's just like it's a case of like that's what math teachers are forced with. Like they know that the majority of people that walk through their door are going to hate math. They're not going to want to do it. But as a general school, system, they are forced to teach these kids that. And they have to make sure that these kids, by the time that semester or trimester or whatever, setup your school runs on, by that end of that time, that kid should understand those concepts. Why can't we do that with cybersecurity?
When I was I've been, I think, in technology for about 10 years, and I went to a event, and somebody from Bellevue High School got up and started talking about how they set up their Windows network, or was the Novell network? I can't remember which. And they had the kids do the whole thing, and the kids loved it. And the kids were getting jobs out of high school while they were in high school to do network security and network stuff. And I think that's what I found in the classes is that if you give them a challenge to work on, especially if they can do it together, you see amazing things happen. I think cybersecurity could easily be taught that way.
Yeah,
how do I keep my network secure? I don't want anybody coming in and screwing it up. So it's very cool.
Yeah, I remember like in high school, like one of my biggest frustrations was just that I felt like what we were learning wasn't relevant. And that was kind of a silly thought to have because some of it was absolutely relevant, but it was like you're learning I don't want to say beneath the fundamentals, but it's like the fundamentals that introduce you to the fundamentals of what you're actually wanting to get into. But I don't know. Like say like the person, like I took a personal finance class, like that was a bit more clear, like on its relevance to my life, right? Post high school, or like I don't know, what were some other classes that I took in high school? I took like speech and debate, and I thought that was like relevant, being able to like think through issues and unpack like that kind of stuff, and then argue like for and against, like even my own opinions, right? But what and I like that you're the story about it was Bellevue High School, right?
Right.
Students being able to witness and get to see that immediate connection on its relevance, and know that they're not wasting their time, or they're not having their time wasted and learning that stuff and getting that practice, right?
Yeah.
I think the more we can find ways to do that and to justify, why we're teaching kids things, I think that's how we're really going to drive higher engagement.
I think that's true. And I think these are new cutting edge types of problems too.
Yeah.
If we can get kids involved in them, teenagers and junior grad type of people, it's just amazing how fast they pick it up, just super fast. Whereas for me, it took me forever to pick up the technology, but these kids are just so quick if they get the chance. But if all they do is spend their time, I'm really good at Facebook and I don't know anything else, but I can play good video games. I must know a lot about computers and not really understand. There's a whole iceberg underneath the water of technology and cool stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, how packets work through an internet, it's just the coolest thing in the world.
Right.
If it's taught well.
Yeah. If it's not, it's terrible and boring.
Good old Wireshark.
Yeah. Real quick before we continue, if you're watching and you have not yet subscribed to the Cyber Monday Show channel, be sure to do that. It should be in the pinned comment. If it is not, then it is pasted in the chat right now. So be sure to check that out. The replay for this podcast will be available there and not on the StudioSec channel. Hitherto forth, as they say, I think. If they don't say that, then, well, I'm a clown. But also, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the chat, and we'll talk about it. And so be sure to go ahead and start doing that. But
I thought.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
Ahead.
I had nothing else to say.
I was going to say, John was making some comments about documentation again. One of the things that happened when my first mentor was a technical editor at McGraw-Hill Publishing for networking books. And when you're in technology, it's easy just to get lost in how do I build a server? How do I do these things? But if you can cross-train yourself in other areas. So like he was a technical editor. And so a friend of mine, when I was working at the city of Seattle, said, James, if I only had $500 more a month, then I could have a baby with my wife. And I was like, oh, that'd be cool. And then I remembered my mentor used to do for $500, he's edited a book at McGraw-Hill Book. So I went over to McGraw-Hill Book, logged on, said, hey, yada, yada, yada. And they said, oh, yeah, we'd love to have you do it. And I said, oh, it's just for my friend. So I went ahead and did a technical editing role at McGraw-Hill Books. But I went back to my friend, he was manager at Seattle, and I said, here's what I did. Here's how you walk in. And he started editing books. And I only did a couple. That started being his part-time gig. And I think that's a really good way, to learn technical writing. It's a good way to learn new technologies. It's a good way to have real world type of thing, because you got to know how to deal with stuff. That's why I got into teaching. I've just found I can learn so much more, like we were talking about. It's why I go back and work at Microsoft on a contract or two period, because I really want to understand what it is those developers are thinking. And when you understand what they're thinking, then you can build stuff the way they do. And one thing they don't know that you and I know is that when you build something for a user and you see that light in their eyes, and they go, you mean it can do this? And they say, yeah. And they go, that's cool. Well, if it can do that, hey, can it also do this? And I'm like, I guess, why would you want to do that? And then they tell you the whole business reason why their whole business is dependent on this exact thing. I said, yeah, I guess you could. Let's see how to do it. And they go crazy on it. So now you've got your users is starting to become realistic and stuff. So I say that go over to and look for opportunities to understand the new technologies, to edit for technical books, to write papers, to write blogs. I think what you're doing on the podcast is great for keeping up and being cutting edge. Just get yourself out there and do extra things. I just meet so many brand new kids that think it's a 9 to 5 job and don't realize they're competing against guys who live, sleep, dream, and breathe this stuff and would do it for free over and over again. But you can go to a chamber of commerce or a business association, and I've done both of these things, and volunteer your time, and you learn so much by learning about another company or learning about another industry. And you go, why would you want to do that? Well, because then we can help the world. We can get more stuff to kids so they have shoes. I'm like, oh, well, let's do it then.
Yeah, and even to kind of emphasize on your point for like the security world, like you're not just competing against your peers and colleagues, like you're competing against, again, I said weapons earlier, and I was about to say the enemy. You're competing against adversaries, right? It's that like army language, but you're competing against like the threat groups out there that like they've been doing it for free, they're doing it for fun, and they will do it anytime, and they know that like they know you log off at 5 o'clock, and that's probably about the time that they're going to log on to your account. Like it's a 24/7 battle, and it's not necessarily, unfortunately, it's not necessarily something that you can just turn off and walk away from too easily.
When I was watching your blog getting ready for this, and you were talking about the hacks and how they were got through, and I'm listening to the wars and the different things. I study Sun Tzu. Do you know Sun Tzu?
Oh, of course. I got to know who that is.
Sun Tzu is The Art of War, is like 3,000 years old, Chinese guy.
Oh.
He wrote the book on strategy. And I started memorizing the little pieces in Sun Tzu, and I found that those things are in everything. If you go to IBM Consulting and start understanding how they write reports, they follow Sun Tzu almost exactly. And when you start looking at how a hacker is going to work, there's 5 different strategies that Sun Tzu has for attacking an attacker. He was one of those guys that he fought and helped overcome all of China, never lost a single battle. Was quite often the armies had more men than he did, so he couldn't just beat him up with brute force. He had to use tactical strategy. So his rule was, if you have to fight the battle, then you've lost. And so he teaches you all the different areas that you can get into, and it still works today. And so when I was listening to you guys talk about the cybersecurity attacks, I said, oh, they're picking out this tactic in Sun Tzu. Oh, they're picking out this tactic in Sun Tzu. It's not always brute force. It's just knowing something that nobody else knows, and they took advantage of it.
Yeah, that is exactly hacking,
Mm-hmm.
I want to kind of touch on something Leonardo in the chat said, and I think it's something I personally like doing anytime I've ever had to write documentation on a particular process or something. And I've written a lot of documentation because back again when I was working in help desk, we had, for whatever reason, no documentation on how to do anything hardly. And I was like, I'm going to change.
I can tell you horror stories.
Oh yeah. It drove me nuts. And I'm like, how do we not have anything? So I was like, okay, I'm going to hit the ground running. I'm going to figure out, what you can't do or what you shouldn't do. And then I'm going to write a process on the proper way to do this. And Leonardo had put in here, he goes, please use screenshots in your documentation. I absolutely love taking screenshots and putting it in my documentation so that it is not just words. It's literally like, this is a picture. This is what you should see. And this is what you should be clicking on. And I would literally, I think another thing too that I would do when I would write it is depending on who I knew I was writing the documentation for, kind of knowing your audience. If it was for somebody on our team that was more technical, I could get very technical with it because I know that they would understand it. But if I was doing it for an end user, I would write it that like you could bring in anybody from the street, doesn't matter who it is, you could bring your uncle in who works at Subway, and they would know by reading this documentation how to do the job right the first time. And I really, really do appreciate the little comment on screenshots, because that was a big thing. I mean, my documentation would be sometimes 5-6 pages long, and 75% of it was screenshots, because it was just like, I'm very much a visual, hands-on learner. If I see that this is what I'm supposed, this is probably why I like Legos so much, because there's no words for Legos. It's just images, and it tells you this brick is used this many times in this particular step, and it shows you exactly where they need to go for the most part. And it's a very, very easy to follow instructions. And I kind of take that type of, documentation, everything, into documenting stuff like process and everything, even in my job.
Yeah. So are you just making a statement, or are you asking about visuals in your documentation?
Well, so like when you're doing technical writing, and I have zero, at least I think I have zero experience in technical writing, are screenshots something that you use, or is it just all verbiage?
It depends on the audience. That's the perfect technical answer. It depends. It depends. If you need screenshots, we put screenshots into the image. Now, one of the things that we tend not to do is, say you've got a wizard and you're following a wizard, and you have a screenshot of every single wizard. That's not something that you're recommended to do. So what I do on for example, a wizard that you have to follow, there's certain inputs that you have to do into it. So I'll put, here's what's going to happen in this. You're going to go through a wizard. It's going to ask you about these 5 things, or these 7 things, or these 10 things, or usually it's more like 2 or 3. When you, and in my instructions, I'll say, just take the defaults until you get to this screenshot. And then I might put a screenshot for that particular wizard to show how to put the DNS information, or the naming information, whatever it is that the wizard is asking for. But with wizards, I tend not to put a lot of screenshots. But when it comes to, say I was designing if I was documenting the topology of the network infrastructure, because I wanted to have a troubleshooting document, and I wanted people to know where the data was going and what path it was taking through the whole network, and I was expected to. Yeah, I would definitely put I could put a very complex screenshot into that image. And then I would just explain what's going on in there, but that I would hopefully make an image that it was clear what the overall thing is. And that's for me. I found when I was first started out, if I knew what it was supposed to look like when it was done, then I could troubleshoot it. But if I didn't know what it looked like, I had to document everything in order to get through the troubleshooting process. So I just try to build this is what it looks like when it's working right. Here's a screenshot of the log file when the log is right. At the bottom, here's the log files. Here are the exceptions. When you're troubleshooting, you've got this log file. You'll see this error. That means this. You can go and look it up online, or you can just, that you've got a problem. This SQL server isn't talking to this this other SQL server. So there's no one answer. It just depends. But what happens when you put too many screenshots in, then you get hundreds of pages of documentation. Now, if you're going through it and you're an advanced user, you've done this before and you've forgotten one piece, now you have to read through every single screenshot and every single explanation in order to figure out where is that the problem is. And I don't want my readers to have to read lots of extra stuff before they find the one gold nugget diamond in the middle of everything. I want them to be able to find the information in 2 minutes rather than reading a 75-page document. But it depends on the reader. Some readers have never done this before, and those people that are off the street, they need a different set of documentation than somebody who's been doing this for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I do in the prerequisites of the documentation, I say, you need to understand this principle, this principle, this principle. You need to set up this in advance. You need to do this. If you haven't done these things, go figure out how to do those before you read this document.
I like prerequisites. I'm going to start doing that in my documentation.
Prerequisites and assumptions, prerequisites, assumptions, all those kind of things. I'm assuming that you can read English. And if you can't, here's where it is in Spanish.
Yeah.
Don't use Google Translate, please, for the love of God.
What?
Said don't use Google Translate. It does not translate well.
Yikes.
I have a horror story.
Oh, no.
I can hear it in your voice.
Yeah.
The fear is seeping through.
Real quick, side story. I was playing games with somebody that was from like the part of Canada where they're speaking French. French is their main lingo. And I looked on his gaming profile and it's all in French. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to converse with this person, like, because I enjoyed playing a game with him. He was good. And so I was like, this is what I want to say, typed it into Google Translate, hit translate, and then I typed it out in my game console to him in the chat. And he literally responds back. He goes, bro, did you literally just use Google Translate? And I was like, yes. And he goes, don't ever use Google Translate. He knew what I was trying to say, but he's like, it did not necessarily come out that way.
Yeah. I love the assumptions tab in documentation because it's kind of like a cover your back section. It's like now you can't say that like I was assuming that we were all good here on that. So I love it.
Well, I do too, because it's literally like, instead of, and I guess this is again maybe I need to take a technical writing class, see if they have it on Udemy or something, but that's kind of, I guess, where I was at fault because I was always writing the the documentation because I was always taught like never assume. Mm-hmm. You never assume that somebody knows something. So that's how I was brought up in IT. I was just always taught you do not assume that the end user knows anything. You have to go in assuming.
Different question.
Huh?
That's a different audience.
Yeah.
So if I'm writing to you, I would assume that you know more than a user does.
Little do you know.
And if I was writing about subnetting, I would say you need to understand this, this, and this, mm-hmm. and beforehand, and say if you don't know this, you won't understand it. Then I can write to the things that we're trying to talk about. If I try to start it, if I don't have assumptions, then I begin writing and I have to explain each principle before we finally get to the meat that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm an advanced user, I don't care about that. If I'm a brand new user, I want way more of it. So if I'm a user on the desktop trying to figure out how to set up their printer, we want lots of pictures, lots of, but we don't go into deep explanations of how a printer cartridge works.
Right. Yeah. Here's how physics. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. The target audience is such like a critical component. It's great. But before we wrap up, I wanted to make sure that we did talk about work from home because we were talking about this before we went live, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that this is definitely an interesting thing to hit on, especially now as fortunately people are coming out of quarantine and many companies are calling people back into the office. What are your thoughts on work from home? We talked about before, that you've been working from home for a little while now, and you were advocating about it for quite a while. So, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, when I was working on my master's thesis, I was looking for a topic that was interesting, and I've been around a long time, and so I came through some of the early when gasoline hit $1, we were all flabbergasted, $1 a gallon. And we were really worried what we were going to do when the gas ran out and all that kind of stuff. So one of the options was working remotely or working from home. We called it telecommuting, and there were different telecommuting solutions. But when you listen to, there were naysayers. Some of the naysayers were managers. Some of the naysayers were workers who were jealous of people being able to work from home and take care of their kids while they were working at the same time. Or the managers who managed by fire, the ones that if a fire came up, all of a sudden we have to get the whole team around. We'll work on it really fast and make sure it's problem is solved. And we look at people who are really social and come to work because they really need that social time to be a happy person. Those type of people would, back in the 70s and the 80s, they would sabotage remote solutions. But if we think about 200 years or 400 years ago, when people were discovering America, and the governor of Portugal, or not Portugal, but of the different islands that were being discovered in the Spanish Main and the different places, they would be gone for 2 years. So how were they managed? They didn't have somebody calling them up every single day. They couldn't tell them what to do. They had to be remotely managed from a much longer distance. Today, we don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So how were they productive and how are we not productive? And what we found was that in the studies, the average workforce is 30% more productive that works from home. The person that needs to have a water cooler to talk around or really wants to work together, it didn't work back in the 70s and the 80s when I was writing this kind of documentation. In the 90s, we started to see more computers, but it was still just a hope and a dream. When we saw Microsoft come up with Link, all of a sudden they were combining, and analog phones were no longer analog, they were now digital, and we had digital images, we had digital computers, and all those things put together. Now you can get all the data across a cable as opposed to having 5 or 6 different cables coming into your system. So now we find people are much more effective if they're working from home. They aren't doing, the average person spends 2 hours a day just fiddling around, trying to walk around, talk to people, catch up. Man, I've met some warehouse. I've been on some warehouses where some of the managers that don't want to use the technology, I'm managing by walking around. And so they spend half their day or more walking around, talking to people. And that's a legitimate personality, and they're very successful at what they do. I would never say it's wrong, but we don't need it anymore. And when people are working from home, they aren't in their cars, congesting the freeways, smogging up the air up in and building carbon footprint, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very, very pro telecommuting and remote working, and I love we were talking about Zoom. I've spent a lot of time with Microsoft, so I'm very Teams oriented. I do most of Teams meetings and stuff. Of course, I get in trouble because some people hate Microsoft, but it's just a much easier way now for me. Now 2 years ago, I was working with a team in Scotland here and in the United States, and we were building a training class for a bunch of people trying to learn how to support technology. Last summer, I was working with a team in Brazil that had people in Portugal. They were all in the team. We were learning paths for online training using Storyline. And so when you're talking to people, and the most difficult thing to do is to get a developer to stop, look at your writing, and then critique your writing, and then they don't have time to look at that stuff. But if you can put it into a Teams or into some type of joint place, if you like Google, in a place where everybody can see the document and they log on to it, they only have to spend a few minutes looking at it. And then they can get on with their job, and they can just scratch your stuff all up and make it tell you what's wrong with it. And then you take it and you rewrite it very quickly. The next day you have another thing. Also, I think I told you about Washington Mutual. With Washington Mutual, we were building the first online banking system that there was. And we had a problem because it would take a week for the developers to get the software. We had 10 different teams of developers working on software. And then we would have to run that. It was a waterfall project. So we had to run it through 4 levels of server systems. And each time it ran through the server system, it would have to get tested again. And so they could write a new piece of code and they might not be critiqued on that code until a month later. When we put we had a team in India that would do the testing. They could write their code and they could run it through the tests overnight, so that by the time you walk in the morning, hung over on EverQuest or EverCrack, they would start. They would open their documents and they'd see all the testing was completed within less than 12 hours. This remote movement across the world is just going to make things happen so quick. Whereas before it would take 2 weeks to run a waterfall or a scrum, what we would probably call a scrum, although that's not a waterfall thing. Now we could get that whole test done in less than 12 hours. That's just was incredible. Because we did that one thing, bring on a remote test team from India that worked during their daytime, we worked during our daytime. We were able to move that progress on that project up by 6 months. And this is a project at Washington Mutual. You have CapEx money for a company. They took 2 years of CapEx money and invested it into that online banking system. So just having that, just reducing that time was super amazing. And I see that now all the time with different remote companies that are international and working around the world. And I've taught classes in India, I've taught classes in South Dakota, and I've taught classes in the South, all through remotely on Teams or Zoom or different places. So I think this is further than we went in that conversation. I don't know if this is what you wanted to hear, but I think remote is the way to go. But I think we need to make sure that I love the way that we can now interact through Zoom and in different ways besides just scheduling a meeting for an hour. We can talk to people casually, but it doesn't cost anything. It's great.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's exactly what that was great. That was a great answer. I'm kind of interested to see if the metaverse pans out, and as a way to socialize remotely. I feel personally the screen door effect with VR headsets is somewhat prohibitive towards staying on VR for too long.
I'm here where I'm thinking about these guys that I talked about earlier. Twitter came out, and all of my technical class, all the kids I was teaching, Twitter won't last. They were telling me they were laughing about social media and all this stuff. And so now we look at Twitter and we go, "Oh, that worked out." So I wonder about Meta as well.
Yeah, we'll see. Time will tell.
There are some interesting online communities that use different avatars. I have been looking forward to some type of virtual reality where we could do a Dungeons and Dragons using virtual reality with headsets. That would be the coolest, I think.
James, you and I are best friends now. First status audio and now D&D. My God.
Connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll do wonderful things together.
And so a wonderful friendship was born. Well, I feel like that's a great high note that we should probably call it on. It is super late here on a Monday, so, and James, I don't want to keep you too late on your Monday evening as well. But thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your thoughts. This has been an absolute pleasure.
No problem. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, this has been great.
Got my socializing in for the next 2 months, so that's great.
I love it.
I told you I was an introvert.
Yeah. I relate. I 1000% relate. Except we'll be back next week. If you're watching, we'll be back next week with another episode. Again, be sure to subscribe to the Cyber Monday Show channel. This will be available for replay there and not on StudioSec, and that'll be the case for all the future episodes as well. So with all that, we will see you all next time. See ya.
Bye.